morning and welcome to Rising. We have a great show for you today. As always, I'm Amber Duke, joined at the table by Kevin Walling. Kevin, good to see you.
Amber, good to be with you. Happy Friday.
Happy Friday.
Always love you joining on the end of the week. And we've got a big show for you today, but starting off right off the bat, Democrats are pulling out the big guns, as you see right behind us. Former President Barack Obama came out swinging at his first rally for vice president and 2024 Democratic presidential nominee Kamala Harris in Pennsylvania just last night. The former president, of course, took some jabs at former President Donald Trump, and he also had a message specifically for black men.
Part of it makes me think that, well, you just aren't feeling the idea of having a woman as president. Mm-hmm. And you're coming up with other alternatives and other reasons for that. And so now you're thinking about sitting out or even supporting somebody who has a history of denigrating you because you think that's a sign of strength, because that's what being a man is, putting women down. That's not acceptable.
And former President Bill Clinton will hit the campaign trail for the vice president this weekend in a push to gain support from rural voters across battleground states. Bill Clinton will begin his stops in Georgia on Sunday and is expected to continue through North Carolina next week.
Meanwhile, Trump gave remarks at the Detroit Economic Club yesterday, and in case you missed it, let's watch.
The whole country is going to be like, you want to know the truth? It'll be like Detroit. Our whole country will end up being like Detroit if she's your president. You're going to have a mess on your hands. She destroyed San Francisco. She destroyed, along with Newsom, California. And we're not going to let her do that to this country.
25 days away from the presidential election, it's looking like Republicans might take control of the Senate. The latest polling from the New York Times and Siena College shows Republicans leading in key Senate races, including Ted Cruz in Texas, Tim Sheehy in Montana, and Rick Scott in Florida. All right, so let's start right off the top with Obama's rally for Kamala Harris. I got to say, Kevin, I found it a little bit weird that she wasn't there.
Well, I think it's like a divide and conquer operation, right? So, you know, obviously she had the Univision town hall. She was campaigning last night in Arizona. I think this is, 25 days out, all hands on deck, spreading everybody out. Barack Obama out there with Josh Shapiro, a very popular incumbent governor of Pennsylvania. Obviously something for Bob Casey as well. That some polling, and we can talk about some of these Senate races as you previewed. Some polling there is getting a little tighter in the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania as well. But certainly I think it's this all hands on deck approach. I want to hear your thoughts on, going to Detroit, the former president standing at that podium, Detroit Economic Club, and saying your city's going to heck, and let's not turn other places into Detroit.
Yeah, I mean, typically you would not advise a candidate to dump on the city that you're campaigning in, but I guess the question is, are the people of Detroit satisfied with what Detroit is like? I mean, it is a legitimate thing to raise the fact that their manufacturing has been hollowed out in a lot of ways. Crime is up pretty significantly. Housing is not in a great place. So maybe those people in the room appreciated that Trump was being honest about the state of Detroit. I know people have been trying to sell this idea of a Detroit resurgence. They point to factories like Shinola. I'm a big fan of their watches, I admit.
I do love Shinola watches too.
Right, great watches, but the net population growth last year was only plus 2,000. So I think maybe people are getting a little bit ahead of their skis on the great revitalization of Detroit. Look, everybody would love to see it happen. Detroit can be a great city. It has been a great city. But I guess I don't think it's as big of a blunder as people were trying to make it out to be. In fact, I don't think it was quite as bad as Obama lecturing black men about how they're misogynistic for not wanting to support Kamala Harris. I mean, it's kind of the same thing, right? You don't attack the city that you're campaigning in, and maybe you don't talk badly about the people whose votes you're trying to win over.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's somewhat of a carrot and stick thing that, and I think the former president, in terms of Barack Obama, is uniquely positioned to have those kind of frank, honest conversations with folks He launched My Brother's Keeper and all that kind of stuff. And that's been a charism of his focus post-presidency, is engaging, especially with young black men. So I think, we'll see how that resonates with that key community. Obviously, there's some scary polling numbers, at least in that population, drifting towards Donald Trump. And obviously concerted efforts. You saw the vice president on, with two former NBA podcasters just last week. Other kind of more tailored, Howard Stern, another conversation from earlier this week, a concerted effort to reach out to those key populations that have been shifting away in some of these recent polls that could make a difference in some of these key congressional districts and obviously battleground states as well.
Yeah, and speaking of the polls, we do have some new polling on the Senate races, as we talked about. You mentioned Pennsylvania, where McCormick has closed the gap with Bob Casey. I think they're within 3 or 4 points, or McCormick is within 3 or 4 points now. He probably will also get a bump from the fact that Trump is on the ticket. So I expect that race to be pretty close. The sort of white whale that we've been talking about for Democrats is Ted Cruz's Senate seat in Texas, right? They tried to get him with Beto O'Rourke. He ended up winning by about 4 points. It looks like he'll probably end up winning this one by about 2 or 3 against Colin Allred. But they keep narrowing the gap. And I know that some people think that this is evidence that Texas is going blue. I'm not sure I buy that, because if we saw John Cornyn's race, a few years back, he ended up winning his seat by about 9 points. I think Ted Cruz is just uniquely unlikable. And you have to consider that Mitch McConnell, the Senate Leadership Fund, and pretty much everybody else in the Senate doesn't like Ted Cruz and doesn't invest any money in his races. He also has notorious grifter Jeff Rowe as his general campaign consultant. So I just would caution anybody thinking that there's so much you can read in the Ted Cruz tea leaves.
Yeah, and again, I think the previous results speak to that against Beto O'Rourke just 6 years ago. Morning Consult obviously ranks all 100 senators, and Ted Cruz is certainly massively underwater with in-state Republicans.
Right.
When it comes to that, also Colin Allred is has a compelling message, obviously compelling biography.
He's a good candidate.
NFL star. I mean, he's raising tons of money in that race, just as Beto O'Rourke did as well. We know in politics, money isn't everything. But one other race that's not been on a lot of people's radar is this Nebraska Senate race.
Right.
Democrats haven't fielded a candidate. There's an independent in that race.
Dan Osborne.
Dan Osborne, and some of the polling is certainly within the margin of error. Mitch McConnell, John Cornyn, other Republican Senate leadership probably doesn't want to be spending many resources in deeply red Nebraska, just like we don't want to be spending many resources in deeply blue Maryland, fending off Larry Hogan.
Sure.
But that's been interesting in terms of breaking polling information, at least now just about 3 weeks out.
Yeah, that is a very interesting race. The other ones that I'm watching, of course, are Michigan, where Mike Rogers has closed a bit of the gap there.
There were some fireworks in that debate just the other night between him and Elise Slotkin in that key race. That's a key hold for Democrats, obviously.
Yeah, exactly. And she's been sort of trying to distance herself from electric vehicle policies because of Michigan's reliance on the auto industry. Nevada with Sam Brown is another one to watch. And then
against Jackie Rosen.
Yes, exactly. And
another key hold for Democrats. In that state.
And people might be surprised to hear that Carrie Lake is surprisingly close in Arizona to Ruben Gallego.
I don't know if I believe that.
We'll see.
Former Governor Lake or current Governor Lake
right.
coming closer.
Her and Stacey Abrams, right? And then Montana, the New York Times says she up 8 percentage points.
That's certainly
kind
giving
of a blowout,
Democrats
right?
the most heartburn in recent days and weeks. Obviously, John Tester has been there a number of cycles. He's a well-known quantity in that state. He's been able to hold on while the state breaks 20-plus points for Trump in the last 2 cycles. But he's running up against a young, attractive, well-financed candidate, and we'll see how Montana shakes out. That's a must-hold as well, with West Virginia obviously flipping to the Republicans with Joe Manchin's
I think that's
departure.
a lost cause.
Yeah, that is something we agree on.
Yes. All right. We're going to keep following these Senate races and, of course, the presidential. We've got more to come here on Rising after this.